after word of a meeting set to take place where key Republicans will discuss what to do surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Joining us now to discuss this and so much more is Madeline Summerville, political strategist, back here on the Live Zone. Good to see you, Madeline. All right,
Good to see you, Guy.
Oh, there we go. I thought perhaps we had somewhat of a delay. Not the case. Always good to have you right here on the Live Zone. Let's jump into this. And we know that the president reignited his threat, if you will, for the federal government to run good old Washington, D.C. This after a former DOJ employee was assaulted in an attempted carjacking. Now, Madeline, the president, in so many words, said if D.C. doesn't get its act together, he will enact a federal takeover. But correct me if I'm wrong, it's not that easy, is it not?
Definitely not. So here's the thing. It's very interesting to see Republicans get behind the idea of federalizing anything when they've spent as far back as I've studied advocating for states' rights. Now, DC is not a state, but it certainly has its own rights as its own governmental entity. And so that's very interesting to me. There are a lot of different procedures that they could go through in order to be able to institute this, but it's going to take a lot of people agreeing on it, and getting my husband and I to agree on where to go to dinner is difficult enough.
Yeah, I got to tell you, this was somewhat interesting to hear the president not only say this time, but say it in the past. It appears that this is something that is really top of mind for him. And yet again, it appears it's something that he really wants to do. But because of the Home Rule Act, it's going to be a lot harder than him just, let's say, doing that with the stroke of a pen.
Oh, certainly. And I also think it's interesting that he's trying to institute this takeover as a result of crime when there's actually been no spike in crime whatsoever in DC. In fact, the crime levels are at the lowest that they've been since COVID. So this is, of course, a tragedy and something that needs to be addressed 100%. One crime like this is too many, and there absolutely needs to be an intervention. But do we need to upset the whole apple cart and rile everybody up in order to do it? I don't think so.
Yeah, and to your point, our own Melanie Alwick reporting earlier today, crime is now down 26% compared to this time last year. Let's move on to the next topic. In this case, top brass within the Trump administration will meet tonight during a dinner on how to address the fallout of the Jeffrey Epstein issue, if you will. This will take place at Vice President J.D. Vance's home. Now, one of the family members of the victims who committed suicide says they should have invited the survivors. Wow. Your response to this?
This is a very interesting point. And just as a strategist in general, I think that what she's saying without saying is tell us whose side you're on. Because if you want to take the side of the victims here, which is the side that we're supposed to be assuming that you're on, let's see some evidence of that. Because if all you're doing here is inviting people to try to mitigate the damage that's already happened or prevent future damage from happening, then it doesn't really seem like you're that concerned about what the rest of your base is concerned about. Really, frankly, all of America.
Yeah, but yet again, to think that this is something that's unfolding and that it continues to plague the Trump administration. And now you have, well, let's say, family members of the victims coming forward and saying, you know what, you're not doing enough in order to address this. It's yet again pressing for the administration.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I think it speaks to a larger issue, which is something that Republicans I've seen in Georgia do as well. And Democrats are guilty of it too. But have you asked the people who this is supposed to help, whether this is actually helpful to them, right? Like with redistricting in Texas, have you asked the people whether their representatives represent what they want and what they think? And so I think it's very important actually to include the people that this issue is actually about when you're trying to solve problems.
All right, you just made mention of the issue or the scenario that's taking place down in Texas. We now know that the congressional map Texas Republicans hope to enact targeted not one, not two, but count them, 5 Democratic-held districts with precision, carefully cutting out blue areas and redistributing them to other districts, which are already safe for either party, and replacing them with, let's say, red turf. Your thoughts on all of this?
So here's the breakdown. You're really supposed to do this every 10 years. And John Adams, when this first started, said that the maps are supposed to reflect the people. They're supposed to look like the state looks in terms of demographics. And that doesn't mean just race, it means socioeconomic status, it means age, it means level of education, because folks who are similar in those areas tend to live in the same areas. So it's important that your congressional representative matches in your beliefs and ideals what you believe. And so drawing these funky lines to try to make it work, actually my husband corrected me, it's not gerrymandering, it's gerrymandering. The guy who created the concept of it, his last name was Gary. And then actually there was a newspaper in 1812 that put the wiggly lines that he had drawn to try to redistrict in this newspaper, and it looked like a salamander, hence Gary mandering. I looked up the whole thing so I could try to understand the lexicon and the history of it. But that's kind of, it's always been that way. It's always been funky lines. You're allowed to do it for political purposes, which is why it's crazy. It's just usually not done outside of that 10-year difference, right? Because by 10 years from then, the demographics would have changed. It makes sense to edit things. Now, they had just edited maps recently in Texas. So what I think is really interesting is the entire focus is on what President Trump came out and said, which is, we would like 5 more seats, please. And instead of going to the people of Texas and saying, do your Congress people represent you, he's making that decision. I don't understand why people aren't talking about the people who are actually involved here.
Well, I tell you, you learn something new every day. In this case, I went from Jerry to Gary, and because of you, I learned something new. Madeline, we'll end with this, and that is federal employees will no longer have to meet Elon Musk's demand that they list their weekly accomplishments in an email or risk termination. The move to end the email ultimatum comes roughly 2 months after Musk said his time with the Trump administration had come to an end. Quite honestly, was this really necessary?
You know, I think that if Doge were serious about all of the cuts that they were trying to implement, that maybe they would have cut more than 0.27% of the federal budget. I didn't really take most of Doge seriously. Now, in terms of government efficiency, right, or being accountable for what you're doing during the week, that makes sense. It's just maybe we should have taken a scalpel to what we actually took a hammer to.
All right, well said. Yet again, Madeline Summerville, political strategist, joining us right here on the Live Zone. Truly appreciate your time, Madeline.
Thanks, Guy.
Well, earlier